What becomes of a warrior when the war is over? What happens to the sword once the battle is won and the flags are lowered? Some are hung on a wall, polished and revered, a testament to the conflicts they endured and the peace they secured. They become monuments, relics of a past that grows more distant with each sunrise. But some are not so fortunate. Some are discarded, cast aside, their edges dulled by service, their purpose forgotten by the very world they fought to protect. They are left to rust in the damp quiet, their former glory a fading memory, their only remaining enemy the slow, inexorable march of time. This is a story about one such sword, a living weapon forged in the crucible of combat, who found himself facing his final, quiet battle not on a sun-scorched field of dust and fire, but on the cold, sterile concrete of a forgotten room. His name, the one given to him by the only man he had ever truly called brother, was Major. He was a dog. The smell was the first thing that greeted the day, and the last thing to bid it farewell. It was a thick, cloying miasma of ammonia, wet fur, fear, and cheap disinfectant that failed to mask the underlying odor of despair. It clung to the concrete walls, seeped into the chain-link fences, and settled like a shroud over the dozens of occupants who had the misfortune of calling this place a temporary home. The county animal shelter was not a place of hope. It was a warehouse of the unwanted, a final stop on a long road of disappointment. Major lay on the cold floor of his kennel, number 27. His massive block of a head rested on his paws, but his eyes were open. They were a deep, intelligent amber, and in their depths swirled a history that no one here had bothered to learn. They had seen things that would break most men. They had watched the sun rise over the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush. They had scanned the endless, treacherous brown of Iraqi deserts. They had pinpointed the subtle disturbance in the earth that marked a hidden killer, a pressure plate IED that would have vaporized a patrol of young men. Those eyes, now, watched a fat, gray spider meticulously building a web in the corner of his cage. It was a lesson in patience. It was a lesson in survival. He was a pit bull mix, a breed that carried its own sentence in a world quick to judge. His body was a roadmap of a hard life. A thick, pale scar ran from just above his left eye down his cheek, a permanent reminder of a close call with shrapnel. Another, wider scar, puckered and hairless, marred his powerful right shoulder, the entry point of a bullet from a long-forgotten firefight. His brindle coat was coarse, and his ears, once neatly cropped in a military style, were nicked and torn. He was heavy, built low to the ground, 100 pounds of coiled muscle and dense bone that had been honed into a Tier 1 asset. But here, in the dim fluorescent light of the shelter, he was just another scary-looking dog nobody wanted. The tag on his kennel door was a death sentence, written in the neat, detached cursive of a shelter volunteer. It listed his intake date, his breed as Pit Bull X, and his age as EST 8 years below that. In the box-marked condition were the words, scarred, animal aggressive, unadoptable, and at the very bottom, circled in stark red ink, was the date, today. Next to it, the final, damning acronym, PTS, put to sleep. Major did not know what the letters meant, but he understood the feeling in the air. He was a creature of instinct and training, and his senses told him this day was different. The morning routine had been rushed. The usual cacophony of barks and whines that filled the shelter seemed tinged with a higher note of anxiety. He could smell the finality of it all, a scent as distinct as cordite or C4. He had been here for 3 weeks, plucked from the side of a highway by animal control after his last owner. A man who had bought him for his tough appearance had dumped him when he became too expensive to feed. Before that, there had been other owners, none memorable. They were fleeting figures after the first man, the real man, the handler. The memory of him was sharp, a pang of loyalty and loss that never quite faded. The scent of his uniform, the feel of his hand on his head, the specific cadence of his voice giving a command, seek, watch, stay, those words had meant everything. They were his purpose, his world. That world had ended in a cloud of dust and a deafening roar. One moment, he had been on the scent, the faint chemical trace of a massive explosive buried beneath the dirt of a marketplace road. He had given the signal, a sudden, rigid freeze, his body locked, his tail straight. His handler had been turning, shouting the warning to the squad behind them, when the world had erupted in fire. The blast had thrown Major like a child's toy, slamming him into a concrete wall. When consciousness returned, the air was thick with screams and smoke. His handler was gone. Not gone as in left, but gone as in erased. After that came the hospitals, the long flight home in the belly of a cargo plane, the slow, painful healing of his body. His spirit was another matter. He was a hero, they said. He was given a medal that was pinned to a small velvet cushion. But his job was over. A military working dog that had been through a blast of that magnitude was considered unreliable, potentially traumatized. He was honorably discharged, just like a human soldier. But there were no GI Bills for canines, no veteran support groups. He was auctioned off, a piece of surplus equipment, and his descent into the civilian world had begun. Now, years later, it ended here. In Kennel 27. The morning progressed. A young volunteer, a girl with kind eyes and a trembling lip, brought him his last meal. It was a scoop of dry kibble, same as always. She didn't make eye contact with him, but he could smell her sadness. It was a pure, uncomplicated sorrow, and he appreciated it in a detached way. He ate slowly, mechanically. A soldier took what rations were offered. He cleaned the bowl, then drank deeply from the water dish. He had to be ready. Ready for what? He no longer knew. It was simply ingrained in him. Maintain your body. Maintain your readiness. He watched as, one by one, other dogs were led from their kennels down the long hallway at the end of the block. Some went with people who smiled and carried new leashes. Those were the lucky ones, the puppies and the fluffy, friendly-faced breeds. Others were led by a man in green scrubs with a grim, set jaw. Those dogs never came back. Their scent just vanished from the world. Major knew, with the certainty of a predator, which walk he would be taking today. He did not whine. He did not bark or pace. He simply lay there, a stoic monument of muscle and scars, and waited. His war was over. He had served with honor. He had saved lives. He had lost his brother. And now, the world had no more use for him. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness, he saw a dusty road in a foreign land and heard a voice, clear as a bell, calling his name. Miles away, in a world that felt like a different planet, another veteran was fighting his own quiet war. Jack Stryker stood in his gleaming, modern kitchen, the morning sun glinting off the stainless steel appliances. The house was a testament to a life successfully lived, a large, comfortable home in a manicured suburban neighborhood with a good school district and quiet streets. It was the American dream, bought and paid for. But to Jack, it felt like a gilded cage. He was a big man, 6'3" and 230 pounds of what his former commanding officer had called functional granite. His body was a weapon, honed by years of brutal training and deployment as a Navy SEAL. He moved with a silent, deliberate economy, a predatory grace that was unnerving in the placid environment of his home. His face was hard, carved from the same stone as the rest of him, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a jaw that seemed permanently clenched. His war, the one with firefights and foreign hostiles, was over. He had left the teams 2 years ago, after a final, brutal tour in Afghanistan that had cost him his best friend and a piece of his own soul. He had come home to his wife, Sarah, and their young daughter, Lily, determined to be the husband and father they deserved. He had taken a job in corporate security, a high-paying, low-risk position that bored him to the point of madness. The real war was internal. It was fought in the dead of night, when the memory of an IED's flash would jolt him awake, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was fought at the dinner table, when the cheerful chatter of his family would fade into a distant hum, and he would find himself staring at the wall, seeing ghosts in the patterns of the wallpaper. He was haunted by the men he had lost, by the things he had done, and by the deafening, crushing silence of a world without a mission. In the teams, there was always a mission. The objective was clear. The rules of engagement were defined. Your brothers were to your left and your right. You knew who you were and why you were there. Out here, in the civilian world, the lines were blurred. The objectives were soft. Close this deal, attend this parent-teacher conference. Remember to take out the recycling. It felt meaningless. He felt like a ghost, a specter of violence and discipline rattling around in a life of peaceful prosperity. His body was here, in this beautiful kitchen, But his mind was 10,000 miles away, scanning a ridgeline for threats, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that was no longer there. He was going through the motions. He loved his wife. He loved his daughter. He loved them with a fierce, protective intensity that was the only real thing he had left. But he didn't know how to connect with them. He was an operator without an operation, a warrior without a war, and the isolation was eating him alive. Sarah entered the kitchen, her presence a soft counterpoint to his hard edges. She was a kind, patient woman who had endured his long absences and tried, with all her heart, to understand the man who had come home in his place. She saw the distance in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. She knew he was struggling. "Morning," she said, her voice gentle. She poured herself a cup of coffee, watching him over the rim of the mug. He was staring out the window at the perfectly green lawn, but she knew he wasn't seeing it. "Morning," he replied, his voice a low rumble. He didn't turn. "Lily has been asking again," Sarah began, treading carefully. This was a minefield she had navigated before. "About getting a dog." Jack's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "We've talked about this, Sarah." "I know. But she's 7, Jack. She's lonely. You're here, but you're not. She needs a friend. A companion. A dog is a responsibility. It's a commitment." What he didn't say was that it was an emotional connection he didn't think he could handle. It was another thing to care about, another thing to potentially lose. He had a finite amount of emotional real estate left, and it was all mortgaged to the ghosts of his past. He couldn't afford another attachment. "Maybe that's what we need," Sarah said softly. "All of us. A little more commitment to something simple. Something that just gives love without asking for anything in return." Jack turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "It's not a good time." "Will there ever be a good time, Jack?" she asked, her voice laced with a gentle frustration that hurt more than anger ever could. Lily saw a picture online. From the county shelter. They post pictures of the dogs that are on their last day. Jack's jaw clenched. "That's emotional blackmail, Sarah." "No," she said, holding up her phone. "It's just the truth. Look at him." He didn't want to look. He refused. But Sarah stepped closer and angled the phone into his line of sight. The picture was grainy, taken through the chain link of a kennel. It was a dog, a big, brindle pit bull, sitting with a strange, formal posture. His head was massive, his chest broad. His face was a mask of scars. He looked less like a pet and more like a convict on death row. Jack felt an involuntary flicker of something. Recognition. He saw the cropped ears, the powerful build, the look in the dog's eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't aggression. It was a kind of weary resignation, a dignity that seemed out of place in the grim setting. He saw a soldier. "His name is Major," Sarah said quietly. "They're putting him down today. This afternoon." Jack stared at the picture. Major. The name hit him like a physical blow. It was a common enough name, but it resonated with a painful frequency. He zoomed in on the image, his trained eye scanning the details. He saw the scar over the eye, the thick, muscular neck. He saw something in the animal's posture, a stillness that spoke of immense discipline. This was not just some stray. "No," he said, handing the phone back to her. The word was final. An order. Sarah's face fell. "Jack, please. Just come with me. To see him. That's all I ask. If you look him in the eye and still say no, I'll drop it. Forever." He wanted to refuse. He wanted to walk out of the room, get in his truck, and just drive until the quiet suburbs were a distant memory. But he saw the plea in his wife's eyes, and he heard the unspoken words. "Please, connect with us. Connect with something. Come back to us." He let out a long, slow breath, the air hissing between his teeth. It was a war of attrition, and he had just lost a battle. "Fine," he bit out. "We'll go look. Just look." The drive to the county shelter was short and silent. Sarah drove, her hands tight on the steering wheel, sensing the fragile nature of the truce. Jack sat in the passenger seat, a granite statue staring out at the blur of strip malls and tidy houses. He felt like a hypocrite. He, who had walked through hell and back, was being dragged to an animal shelter like a petulant child. He was angry at his wife for pushing, angry at his daughter for wanting, and angry at himself for his own damn weakness. The shelter was even more grim in person than he had imagined. It was a low, concrete block building tucked away behind the county dump, as if the town itself was ashamed of its existence. The smell hit them the moment they got out of the car, a wave of animal misery that made Jack's nostrils flare in distaste. They walked into the small, cramped lobby. A tired-looking woman with faded blue hair sat behind a plexiglass barrier, talking on the phone in a monotone. The walls were covered in flyers of smiling pets and stark, black and white posters about spaying and neutering. The air was heavy, stagnant. "Can I help you?" the woman asked without enthusiasm, hanging up the phone. "We're here to see a dog," Sarah said, her voice sounding small in the oppressive quiet. "His name is Major." The woman's expression flickered. A hint of pity. "Kennel 27, she said, gesturing down a long, echoing corridor. He's on the list for this afternoon. 2 o'clock. Jack glanced at his watch. It was almost noon. The corridor was a gauntlet of desperation. As they walked, the dogs in the kennels erupted. Barks, yelps, howls, the frantic scratching of claws on concrete. They threw themselves against the chain link, their eyes wide with a desperate plea. "Pick me. See me. Save me." There were dogs of all shapes and sizes. A scruffy terrier that spun in circles, a beautiful husky with mismatched eyes that howled a song of deep sorrow, a litter of black lab puppies tumbling over each other, oblivious to their grim surroundings. Jack ignored them all. He kept his eyes forward, his face a mask of indifference. This was a trap, an emotional ambush. He would not fall for it. He was here to look, to appease his wife, and to leave. They reached the end of the corridor. Kennel 27. Unlike the others, this kennel was silent. The big, brindle pit bull was lying in the exact same position as in the photo on Sarah's phone, his head on his paws. He hadn't moved. He watched them approach, his amber eyes tracking them, but he made no sound. He didn't get up, didn't wag his tail, didn't press himself against the fence. He simply watched, a silent, stoic observer. Sarah knelt down, her face level with the dog. "Hi, Major," she whispered. "You're a handsome boy, aren't you?" The dog blinked slowly. He did not react to her voice. Jack remained standing, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He looked down at the animal, and the world around him seemed to fade away. The barking from the other kennels, the smell of disinfectant, his wife's soft whispers, it all receded into a dull hum. He was no longer in a suburban animal shelter. He was somewhere else. He saw the dog not as a dog, but as a soldier. He saw the discipline in that stillness, the calm acceptance of a fate he could not control. It was the same look he had seen in the eyes of young men before a mission they knew they might not come back from. It was the look of a professional. He crouched down, his knees protesting. He was now eye to eye with the condemned. He looked past the scars, past the breed, and into those deep, intelligent eyes. He saw history. He saw loyalty. He saw a warrior who had been abandoned on the field of battle. And the dog, for the first time, reacted. He lifted his head. He looked at Jack, and there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Not hope, not fear. It was recognition. It was as if he was seeing not just a man, but a man of a certain kind. A fellow veteran. Slowly, deliberately, the big dog pushed himself to his feet. He walked to the front of the kennel and stood there, his massive head held high. He did not whine or lick the fence. He just stood, his presence filling the small space. He was presenting himself for inspection. Jack felt a crack appear in the icy wall he had built around his heart. This animal was a mirror. This scarred, discarded, unadoptable creature was a reflection of how he felt inside. A weapon deemed too dangerous for a peaceful world, left to rust. The injustice of it was a physical thing. It was a cold, hard knot in his gut. This was not some random stray. This was a soldier. And you don't leave a soldier behind. Ever. He stood up, his decision made. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was a duty. He turned and walked back down the corridor, his boots echoing with a new purpose. Sarah, startled, followed him. He didn't stop at the front desk. He walked right past it and into a small, cluttered office where the woman with the blue hair was now sitting, filling out paperwork. A man in green scrubs stood beside her, looking at a clipboard. Jack didn't knock. The two shelter workers looked up, surprised by his sudden, imposing entrance. "I'm taking the dog in Kennel 27, Jack stated. It was not a request. It was a declaration. The woman blinked. "Major? Sir, that dog is scheduled for euthanasia. He's been deemed unadoptable. He's aggressive. He's not aggressive, Jack said, his voice flat and cold as steel. He's disciplined. There's a difference. We can't adopt him out, the man in scrubs said, gesturing with his clipboard. It's policy. The liability is too high. A pit bull with his history. What history? Jack cut in, his eyes locking onto the man's. What do you know about his history? We know he's been passed around. We know he's got scars from fighting. You don't know a damn thing, Jack said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that made the man take an involuntary step back. You see a monster. I see a soldier. Get the paperwork. Now, the woman at the desk swallowed hard. She had seen angry people before. But this was different. This wasn't anger. It was an absolute, unshakable certainty. It was the calm authority of a man who was used to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. Sir, I can't. The hold is on him. The order has been signed by the director. Then get the director, Jack said, his voice unwavering. Sarah put a hand on his arm. Jack, maybe we can. He didn't even look at her. Get the director, he repeated to the woman. A door at the back of the office opened, and a harried-looking man in a cheap suit stepped out. What's all the commotion? This gentleman is demanding to adopt the pit bull in 27. The woman explained, relief and fear warring on her face. The director looked Jack up and down, his eyes lingering on the sheer size of him. I'm sorry, sir, but that's not possible. That dog is a danger. Our assessment team. Your assessment team is wrong, Jack said. He took a step forward, and the director instinctively shrank back. Jack leaned over the desk, his presence sucking all the air out of the small room. That dog has more honor and discipline in his little claw than your entire staff combined. You put him in a cage, call him a monster, and then you sign his death warrant because it's easier than doing your job. Today that ends. I am not leaving this building without him. So you have two choices. You can either do the paperwork, or you can try and stop me. There was a long, heavy silence. The director stared into Jack's cold, flint-like eyes and saw no room for negotiation. He saw a man who had made a decision, and for whom obstacles were merely things to be removed, one way or another. He saw the abyss, and he wisely chose to step back from the edge. He let out a shaky breath and nodded to the woman. Do the paperwork, he mumbled, defeated. Liability waiver. As his clause. Everything. Jack straightened up. Thank you for your cooperation. The half hour it took to fill out the forms was a study in tension. Jack stood, silent and watchful, as Sarah filled in their details. He paid the adoption fee in cash, the bills crisp and final. He signed the waiver without reading it. He was taking full responsibility. The mission was his now. When it was all done, the man in the green scrubs, his earlier confidence gone, quietly handed Jack a thick leash. He's all yours. Jack took the leash and walked back to Kennel 27. The other dogs were still barking, a chorus of the damned. But as he approached, a strange thing happened. The barking subsided, rippling outwards from Kennel 27 like a wave of silence. The animals seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Major was standing exactly where he had left him, at the front of the cage, waiting. The shelter worker fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking slightly as he unlocked the kennel door. He opened it just a crack, ready to slam it shut if the dog lunged. Major did not lunge. Jack took the leash. I've got it from here, he said, his voice calm. The worker nodded and retreated, relieved. Jack opened the gate wide. Come on, soldier, he said, his voice low. The big dog walked out of the kennel, his claws clicking softly on the concrete. He did not bound or jump. He walked to Jack's left side and sat, his shoulder nearly touching Jack's knee. He looked up at him, waiting for his next command. It was the perfect heel position, uncoached, instinctive. Jack clipped the leash to his collar. Let's go home, he said. And together, the two veterans walked out of that place of death and into the sunlight. The first few days were an adjustment period, a tense negotiation of territory and trust. Lily, Jack's 7-year-old daughter, was both fascinated and terrified. She had wanted a puppy, something small and fluffy she could dress in doll clothes. What she got was a 100-pound tank with a face full of scars and the eyes of a tired old man. He's so big, Daddy, she whispered from behind the safety of the living room couch. Major, who Jack had settled on a blanket in the corner, simply watched her. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just lay there, a silent, brooding presence. "He's a good boy, sweetie," Sarah said, trying to inject some cheerfulness into the atmosphere. "He's just getting used to us." Jack observed the dog's behavior with a trained, analytical eye. It was odd. The dog wasn't acting like a dog. He didn't sniff around the house, didn't try to jump on the furniture, didn't beg for food. He ate what was given to him, drank his water, and then returned to his blanket. When Jack let him out into the backyard, he didn't run and play. He performed a systematic patrol of the fence line, a slow, deliberate circuit before taking up a watchful position on the back porch. On the second night, Jack was woken from a shallow, restless sleep by a sound. It wasn't loud. It was the soft click of claws on the hardwood floor of the hallway. He slipped out of bed, his senses on high alert, his body automatically shifting into a silent, predatory crouch. He moved into the hallway and saw Major, a hulking shadow in the dim light from the night light in Lily's room. The dog wasn't just wandering. He was clearing the house. He moved from room to room with a fluid, practiced efficiency. He would pause at each doorway, his head low, his ears twitching, listening. He would then enter, sweep the room with his gaze, and move on. He checked Lily's room, standing over her bed for a long moment, his tail giving a single, slow wag before he continued. He checked the living room, the kitchen. He was running a security sweep. Jack watched, mesmerized. This was not the behavior of a stray or a fighting dog. This was the behavior of a trained professional, a multi-purpose canine, an NPC. The next morning, while Sarah and Lily were out, Jack decided to run a test. "Major," he said, his voice calm and firm. The dog, lying on his blanket, lifted his head. Jack held out his hand, palm flat. "Stay." The dog didn't move a muscle. His eyes were locked on Jack. Jack walked out of the room, down the hall, and into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, took out a piece of steak left over from dinner, and put it on a plate. The smell of cooked meat filled the air. He walked back into the living room. Major hadn't moved. His body was rigid with control, but he hadn't budged from his spot. Any normal dog, even a well-trained one, would have been at his feet, drooling. Jack put the plate of steak on the floor, a few feet in front of the dog. "Stay," he repeated. Major's nostrils flared. A tremor ran through his powerful shoulders. But he held his position. His discipline was absolute. He was a rock, an immovable object of pure self-control. Jack felt a surge of respect for the animal. "Okay, boy," he said, his voice softer. "Okay." He walked over and knelt in front of the dog. He ran a hand over the massive, scarred head. The fur was coarse, but the animal beneath was solid, steady. As he stroked the dog's neck, his fingers found something. A small, faded tattoo on the inside of his right ear. It was a series of numbers and letters, blurred with age but still legible. It was an identification number. Military or police. This was the clue. This was the key to unlocking the dog's past. Jack pulled out his phone. He took a clear picture of the tattoo. He had to know. He had to understand who this soldier was. He had one call to make. There was only one person in his network who could dig up this kind of information, no questions asked. A man who existed in the deep, dark corners of the digital world, a ghost in the machine. His name was Marcus Thorne, but no one had called him that in years. In the teams, he'd been their communications and tech wizard, a genius who could pull satellite imagery from a classified server or hack into a hostile network with nothing but a laptop and a bad attitude. After an IED in Ramadi had taken his legs, he'd become a civilian, but he'd never lost his skills. He now operated from a basement in San Diego that he called The Cave, a digital fortress from which he ran a private cybersecurity firm. To his old teammates, he was, and always would be, Oracle. Jack found his number in his contacts, a secure, encrypted line. He hit send. It rang once. "Stryker," a gruff voice answered. "No hello. No pleasantries." "Oracle. It's Jack. I know who it is. My phone has this newfangled thing called caller ID," Oracle grunted. "What do you need? Did you forget your Facebook password again?" "I need you to run a number for me," Jack said, ignoring the jibe. "It's an ID tattoo from a dog." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A dog. A dog," Jack confirmed. He's a veteran. I'm sure of it. MWD or law enforcement. I need to know who he is." "You rescue a dog, and now you're running a background check on him? What? You think he's got priors?" A history of mailman assault. Oracle's voice was laced with cynical amusement. Just run the number, Marcus, Jack said, his voice serious. The amusement in Oracle's voice vanished, replaced by the cool professionalism Jack knew so well. All right, Jack. Send me what you got. Jack texted the photo of the tattoo. A moment later, his phone buzzed. Got it, Oracle said. This might take a while. These databases aren't exactly public record. Some are buried so deep you need a shovel and a clearance from God himself. I'll have to get creative. However you do it, Jack said. I need to know. I'll call you when I have something, Oracle said, and the line went dead. The rest of the day passed in a state of suspended animation. Jack tried to work on a report for his corporate job, but the words on the screen were just meaningless symbols. His mind was elsewhere. He watched Major, who had resumed his post on the blanket, a silent sentinel in the corner of the room. Who were you? Who did you serve with? What did you see? That evening, as Jack was putting Lily to bed, his phone buzzed with a secure notification. A message from Oracle. It just said, call me. Now. Jack felt a cold dread mix with anticipation. He tucked Lily in, kissed her forehead, and went to the one place in the house he felt was truly secure, the garage. He closed the heavy door, shutting out the sounds of his domestic life. He leaned against his workbench, surrounded by the tools and equipment that felt more familiar to him than his own living room furniture. He called Oracle back. What did you find? Jack asked without preamble. Oracle was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. The usual cynicism was gone, replaced by a somber, heavy tone. Jack, are you sitting down? I'm standing. Just tell me. The dog's name isn't Major, Oracle began, his voice low. That must have been given to him later. His registered name, his service name, was Havoc. Havoc. The name echoed in the silence of the garage. It was a good name for a war dog. He was an NPC, Oracle continued, attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment out of Fort Benning. Specialized in tactical tracking and explosive detection. Did 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. His jacket is incredible. The number of finds he had, the lives he saved. The dog is a decorated hero, Jack. Purple Heart and a whole string of commendations. Jack listened, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the workbench. He had known it. He had felt it. But that's not the half of it, Oracle said, his voice dropping even lower. In 2012, he was reassigned, attached to a Naval Special Warfare Development Group. DevGroup. Jack's blood ran cold. DevGroup. SEAL Team 6. His old unit. He was assigned to a handler in your task force, Jack, Oracle said softly. For your last tour? Afghanistan. The Zabul province. Jack couldn't breathe. The garage walls seemed to be closing in on him. He knew what was coming, but he needed to hear it. He had to hear the name. Who was the handler, Marcus? Jack's voice was a choked whisper. Oracle took a deep breath. He knew this was more than just information now. This was a ghost rising from the grave. The handler, Oracle said, his voice filled with a quiet grief, was Petty Officer First Class Ben Carter. Ben. The name struck Jack Stryker like a physical blow, harder than any punch or bullet he had ever taken. It buckled his knees. He slid down the wall of his garage and sat heavily on the cold concrete floor, the phone pressed hard against his ear. The air was gone from his lungs, sucked out into a vacuum of pure, undiluted memory. Ben Carter. Benny. His swim buddy from BUD/S. The man who had stood beside him at his wedding. The godfather to his daughter. His brother. The man who had died in his arms in a dusty, sun-baked marketplace in the Zabul province. His life stolen by a secondary ID that Havoc, the dog, had been frantically trying to locate after the first one went off. The scene played out in Jack's mind, as vivid and brutal as if it were happening right now. The chaos after the first blast, the one that had injured the dog. The screams. The smoke. Ben, ignoring the ringing in his ears and the shrapnel in his own leg, was pushing his way back toward his dog, his partner. Havoc. Havoc, report, he had been yelling. And then the second blast, the one planted specifically to target the first responders. The one that had taken Ben from the world. Jack had been the one to reach him first. He had held Ben, trying to put pressure on wounds that were too grievous, trying to hold a life in that was already gone. And in the background, he remembered the howling. A sound of pure, animal agony and loss. It was Havoc, wounded and bleeding, howling for his fallen handler. Jack had been medevaced out shortly after. He never saw the dog again. He had assumed, in the fog of grief and trauma, that the dog had died from his injuries. He had mourned them both. Jack? Jack, are you there? Oracle's voice was a distant anchor in a swirling sea of pain. I'm here, Jack managed to say, his voice thick. After Ben died, Oracle continued gently. The dog was flown to Germany, then back to the States. He recovered physically, but they said he had, well, they called it canine PTSD. He wouldn't work. He wouldn't bond with a new handler. He was retired from service. The report says he was adopted out through a program for MWDs. After that, the official trail goes cold. He fell off the grid, passed from owner to owner, until animal control picked him up on the side of a highway 3 weeks ago. The horrifying revelation settled over Jack like a shroud. This was not just a dog he had rescued. This was not just a fellow veteran. This was Havoc, Ben's dog, a living, breathing piece of his lost brother, a fellow survivor of the worst day of his life. And he had found him on death row in a county shelter, hours from being extinguished like a piece of trash. The universe, in its cruel and infinite wisdom, had brought them back together. A new emotion began to burn through the fog of Jack's grief. It was cold and sharp and clean. It was rage, a righteous fury, rage at a system that could discard a hero like this. Rage at the careless, thoughtless people who had taken this loyal warrior and broken him, abandoned him. Rage at himself for not knowing, for not looking for him sooner. He pushed himself to his feet, his body trembling with the force of the emotion. He was no longer just a man who had adopted a dog. He was a man with a mission. His mission had been to bring his brothers home. He had failed Ben. He would not fail his partner. Thank you, Marcus, Jack said, his voice now steady, filled with a new, hard purpose. I owe you. Just take care of him, Jack, Oracle said. Take care of Ben's dog. That's the mission, Jack replied, and ended the call. He walked back into the house. The world looked different now, sharper, more defined. The mundane details of his suburban life seemed to fall away, replaced by the stark clarity of a combat objective. Protect, serve, honor the fallen. Havoc was still on his blanket. He looked up as Jack entered, his amber eyes watchful. Jack crossed the room and knelt before the dog. He looked into his eyes, and now he saw it all. He saw the memory of Ben. He saw the shared trauma of that day. He saw the loyalty that had never died. Havoc, Jack whispered. The dog's reaction was immediate and profound. At the sound of his true name, his ears shot up. His body went rigid. A low whine, the first sound Jack had heard him make other than the click of his claws, escaped his throat. It was a sound of disbelief, of recognition, of a name he thought he would never hear again. Jack put his hand on the dog's massive head. It's okay, boy, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's me. It's Jack. You're home now. You're finally home. And for the first time, the big, scarred warrior leaned forward and rested his heavy head on Jack's knee. A shudder went through his powerful frame. He was not just a dog, and Jack was not just a man. They were the last two survivors of Squad Alpha, reunited at last. They were brothers, bound by fire and loss. And in the quiet of the living room, in the heart of a peaceful suburban home, the two veterans finally began to mourn together. The revelation changed everything. Havoc was no longer just the family dog. He was a legacy. He was a living monument to a fallen hero. Jack told Sarah the whole story, his voice cracking as he spoke Ben's name. She wept, her heart breaking for the man, the dog, and for the husband who had been carrying this grief alone for so long. Lily, though she didn't understand the details, understood the shift in the house. She saw her father kneel and hug the big, scary dog, saw the tears in her mother's eyes. She understood that Major, or Havoc, as they now called him, was special. He was family. A new routine settled into the Stryker household. The tension that had permeated the home for 2 years began to dissipate. Jack had a focus. His mission was Havoc. He worked with the dog every day, not training him, but reminding him of who he was. He used the old commands, the ones Ben would have used. Havoc, watch, Havoc, heel. The dog responded with a crisp, joyful precision, his body language transforming from that of a weary pound dog to that of an elite operator. The bond between them was the therapy Jack had so desperately needed. In caring for Havoc, in helping him heal from the trauma of abandonment, Jack found a way to begin healing himself. The nightmares didn't stop, but they were different now. Sometimes, in his dreams, Ben was there, and he was smiling. And Havoc was at his side. The dog, in turn, blossomed. The haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a soft, steady devotion. He was still a guardian, still watchful, but he was relaxed. He learned to play. Lily, losing her fear, would gently throw a soft rubber ball for him in the backyard. He wouldn't chase it with frantic energy like other dogs. He would track it, intercept it with practiced ease, and bring it back, dropping it gently at her feet. He had appointed himself her personal protector, a silent, furry shadow that followed her everywhere. For the first time since he had come home from Afghanistan, Jack felt a measure of peace. He had a purpose that resonated with the core of who he was. He was a caregiver, a commander, a brother. He had brought a soldier home. But the world is not a peaceful place. Even in the quietest of suburbs, evil can find a way in. It seeks out the soft targets, the places that look safe and unprotected. And the striker home, from the outside, looked like just such a place. It was a Tuesday night in late October. A cold rain was falling, slicking the streets and rattling against the windows. Sarah and Lily were asleep upstairs. Jack was in the living room, reading, with Havoc lying at his feet. The dog's head was on his paws, his breathing slow and even. The house was quiet, secure, a fortress of peace. At 2:17 a.m., Havoc's head lifted from his paws. It was a subtle movement, almost imperceptible. But Jack, whose senses were now perfectly attuned to the dog, saw it immediately. The dog's ears swiveled, pointing toward the back of the house. His body went taut, the powerful muscles in his shoulders bunching. A low growl, a sound so deep it was more of a vibration than a noise, rumbled in his chest. Jack put his book down. He didn't make a sound. He looked at Havoc. The dog's eyes were fixed on the hallway that led to the kitchen and the back door. The hair on his spine was raised in a solid, sharp ridge. This was not a cat in the yard alert. This was a threat alert. Jack's body went cold. His sealed training, dormant but never gone, surged to the forefront. His mind became a tactical computer. Threat assessment, asset management, perimeter breach. He slipped off the couch, his movements fluid and silent. He pointed a finger at the floor. "Stay," he whispered. Havoc didn't take his eyes off the hallway, but he acknowledged the command with a slight dip of his head. He remained in his position, a coiled spring of lethal potential. Jack moved through his own house like a wraith. He didn't turn on any lights. He used the faint glow from the streetlights outside, his eyes already adjusted to the dark. He reached the kitchen and peered around the corner. The window over the sink, which looked out onto the back deck, was slightly ajar. A window he knew, with absolute certainty, had been locked. He could hear them now, the soft scrape of a tool against the window frame, the faint whisper of voices. They weren't trying to be quiet. They were clumsy. Amateurs. But amateurs with a crowbar were still a threat to his family. Rage, cold and pure, washed over him. The violation of it. The audacity. To bring violence into his home. To threaten his wife and child. They had no idea what they were walking into. They thought they were wolves entering a sheep pen. They were about to find out they had just broken into the dragon's lair. He retreated silently from the kitchen. His first priority was his family. The principal. He moved up the stairs, his feet making no sound on the carpeted steps. He entered his bedroom. Sarah was still asleep. He gently shook her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open. "Jack? Shoo," he whispered, putting a finger to her lips. "Get Lily. Go into the master bathroom. Lock the door. Do not come out until I get you. Do you understand?" Fear flashed in her eyes, but she didn't question him. She had lived with this man for years. She knew that tone of voice. It was the commander speaking. She nodded, her face pale. As she slipped out of bed to get their daughter, Jack went to the top of his closet. Behind a false panel, he retrieved a locked metal box. His fingers worked the combination from muscle memory. Inside was his Sig Sauer P226, the same sidearm he had carried in the teams. He checked the magazine. Full. He chambered around, the soft shick-shack of the slide the most comforting sound in the world. He moved back to the top of the stairs, taking up a position of tactical advantage. He could see the front door and the entrance to the living room. He was in shadow, a ghost waiting. Downstairs, he heard the window slide open. Then, the soft thud of feet landing on the kitchen floor. One set, then another. "See? Told you it was easy," a smug voice whispered. "Shut up, man. Grab the electronics. I'll check for a safe," a second voice, rougher, replied. There were two of them. Good to know. Jack listened to them moving through his house, touching his things. His rage burned hotter, but his mind was ice. Let them get comfortable. Let them get deeper inside. Let them get off the entry point. He heard one of them move toward the living room. "Whoa, check out this TV," the first voice said. "This is a score." And then, the voice changed. Hey man, there's a dog in here." There was a pause. "So what? Kick it," the second voice said from the direction of Jack's home office. "No, man, this is a big dog. A pit bull. He's just staring at me." Jack could picture the scene perfectly. Havoc, still on his blanket, motionless, his amber eyes glowing in the dark, fixed on the intruder. A silent, terrifying statue of judgment. "Just ignore it, idiot. It's probably scared," the second voice said, his tone dismissive. He was the leader, the arrogant one. He walked out of the office and into the living room to join his partner. "See? It's not even moving. Now grab the—" He stopped. He had seen Havoc now. Jack gave the command. He didn't shout it. He spoke it in a low, firm voice that cut through the silence of the house. "Havoc, watch him." The effect was electric. In an instant, Havoc was on his feet. He didn't bark. He didn't snarl. He moved. With a speed that was shocking in an animal so large, he crossed the room and placed himself between the two intruders and the staircase. The staircase that led to Jack's family. He lowered his head, his massive chest rumbling with that deep, subsonic growl. He was in a vanguard stance, his body a living wall. He was daring them to take one more step. "What the hell?" the first intruder stammered, taking a step back. "Did you hear that? Someone's here. Who the hell are you?" The second one yelled up the stairs into the darkness. He pulled a cheap-looking handgun from his waistband. A foolish move. He had just escalated the situation from a burglary to a home invasion. He had changed the rules of engagement. Jack didn't answer with words. He answered with action. "Havoc, take him," Jack commanded, his voice like a whip crack in the night. Havoc exploded into motion. He was not a dog anymore. He was a weapon system. A furry, 100-pound cruise missile. He launched himself across the room, his target the man with the gun. He didn't go for the throat. His training was too precise for that. He hit the man's gun arm with the force of a battering ram. There was a sickening crunch of bone and a scream of agony as the gun flew from the man's hand, clattering across the hardwood floor. Havoc's momentum carried them both to the ground. He didn't bite to shred. He bit to control. His powerful jaws locked onto the man's forearm, a vise of bone and muscle. He wasn't mauling him. He was holding him, neutralizing the threat. The first intruder, a young kid who looked no older than 20, stared in wide-eyed terror. He was frozen, paralyzed by the sudden, brutal efficiency of the attack. That was Jack's cue. He descended the stairs, not running, but moving with the lethal grace of a panther. He was a massive shadow detaching itself from the greater darkness. The Sig Sauer was held in a perfect two-handed grip, steady as a rock. The kid saw him coming, and his nerve broke completely. He turned to run back, toward the kitchen. He never made it. Jack intercepted him, his large frame blocking the path. The kid let out a pathetic squeak and tried to dodge. Jack didn't bother with a punch. He used an open-hand strike to a pressure point on the kid's neck. It was precise, economical, and devastatingly effective. The kid's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the floor in a boneless heap, unconscious. One down. Jack turned his attention to the second intruder. The man was on the floor, screaming and trying to beat Havoc off his arm with his free hand. The dog held firm, his body low, his growl a constant, terrifying rumble. Jack walked over, his weapon trained on the man's center mass. "Get off my dog," he said, his voice deadly calm. The man, his face a mask of pain and terror, stopped struggling. He looked up from the dog to the towering, menacing figure standing over him. He saw the gun, steady and unwavering. He saw the cold, merciless fury in Jack's eyes. This was not a homeowner. This was a nightmare. "Call him off. Oh God, please, call him off," the man shrieked, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a raw, sniveling terror. "Drop the tough guy act," Jack said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're not a wolf. You're a rat. And you just broke into the wrong damn house." He nudged the man's dropped handgun with his foot, sending it sliding away across the floor. "Havoc, out!" At the command, Havoc immediately released his grip. There was no hesitation. His discipline was absolute. He backed away, saliva and a small amount of blood dripping from his jowls, and took up a guard position over the man, his low growl a promise of what would happen if he moved. The man cradled his arm, sobbing in pain and fear. The arm was clearly broken. Please, man, just let me go. I won't tell anyone. We didn't take anything. You took my peace of mind," Jack snarled, pressing the muzzle of his gun against the man's forehead. The man flinched, a wave of urine darkening his jeans. "You brought your filth into my home. You threatened my family. Going is not an option." The cowardice was pathetic. The shift from arrogant predator to pleading victim was instantaneous. Jack had seen it 100 times on the battlefield. Bullies were always cowards at their core. They only understood the currency of violence, and he was infinitely wealthier in that regard than they were. "Who are you?" the man whimpered. "What are you?" Jack leaned in close, his voice a low, terrifying whisper. "I'm the guy you pray never finds you in the dark. Now, you're going to lie there, and you're not going to move, and you're not going to make a sound. Because he," Jack nodded toward Havoc, "is hoping you'll give him a reason. And I'm not feeling very forgiving tonight." Jack stepped back and retrieved his phone. He kept his weapon trained on the man on the floor as he dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? "This is Jack Stryker at 112 Oakwood Lane," Jack said, his voice calm and clear, the voice of a man reporting a routine traffic accident. "I have 2 home invasion suspects neutralized and requiring medical attention. Please send police and an ambulance. The scene is secure." The arrival of the local police was a scene of controlled chaos that quickly turned into stunned silence. 2 patrol cars screamed to a halt in front of the house, officers spilling out with guns drawn, expecting a hostage situation or a firefight in progress. They found something else entirely. Jack met them at the front door, his own weapon now safely holstered at his back. He was calm, his massive frame filling the doorway. "They're in the living room," he said simply. The officers, a veteran sergeant and a younger patrolman, entered cautiously. The scene that greeted them stopped them in their tracks. The living room was pristine, save for the 2 intruders. One was lying unconscious near the kitchen doorway, a small zip tie, which Jack had retrieved from his garage, now securing his hands behind his back. The other was on his back in the middle of the room, conscious and whimpering, his arm at an unnatural angle. Standing over him, perfectly still and silent, was Havoc. The dog didn't bark or lunge at the uniformed officers. He simply stood his ground, a furry guardian, his eyes fixed on the man on the floor. The sergeant, a man named Miller who had been on the force for 20 years, slowly took in the scene. The neatly packaged criminals, the towering homeowner who radiated an aura of lethal competence, and the massive, scarred dog who was acting with the discipline of a trained soldier. "Sir," Sergeant Miller began, holstering his weapon as he realized the threat was over. "Can you tell me what happened here?" 2 men broke in through the kitchen window, Jack stated, his tone purely factual. "They were armed. They made threats. I neutralized them. My wife and daughter are safe upstairs." "You neutralized them?" the young officer asked, his eyes wide. "By yourself." Jack looked down at Havoc, who looked up at him, his tail giving a single, slow thump against the floor. "No," Jack said. "We neutralized them." Sergeant Miller knelt to examine the conscious intruder, whose name, they would later learn, was Rico. "Looks like a clean break. Your dog did this." "He disabled the threat," Jack corrected. "The threat was armed and moving toward my family. And the other one? He tried to run. He fell." Jack saw no need to elaborate on the finer points of pressure point strikes. As the paramedics arrived and began working on the 2 intruders, Sergeant Miller pulled Jack aside. "Mr. Stryker, I've been a cop a long time. This is the cleanest takedown of a home invasion I've ever seen. You have a military background." "Something like that," Jack said evasively. "And the dog?" Miller asked, looking at Havoc with a new respect. The dog had not moved from his spot, but his posture had relaxed slightly now that other authority figures were on the scene. He's not just a pet, is he? He's a veteran, Jack said, a fierce pride in his voice. Marine K-9 unit, explosive detection. He lied, simplifying the story. DevGru was not something you talked about with local law enforcement. The sergeant nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. That explains it. Explains a lot. He looked from the dog to Jack. You two make one hell of a team. After the intruders were taken away in an ambulance, under police guard, and the young officer had finished taking their statements, a fragile quiet returned to the house. The justice had been swift, personal, and absolute. The empire of these two pathetic criminals had been dismantled in a matter of minutes. Their freedom was gone. Their pathetic attempt at projecting power had been crushed by true strength. For them, it was a fate worse than death. It was utter humiliation at the hands of a man and his dog. Jack finally gave the command Havoc had been waiting for. Okay, boy. Easy. The dog relaxed completely, shaking his massive body from head to tail as if to shed the tension of the last hour. He walked over to Jack and leaned heavily against his legs, looking up at him for approval. Jack knelt and wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck. Good boy, Havoc, he whispered into his fur. Good boy. You saved us. Just then, the master bathroom door opened, and Sarah and Lily crept out. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes searching Jack's for reassurance. Is it over? She whispered. It's over, Jack said, standing up. Everyone's safe. Lily, her small face streaked with tears, looked past her father at the big, scarred dog. She had heard the scream, the crash, the terrible growling. She had been terrified, but now, seeing Havoc standing calmly beside her father, she understood. He hadn't been the monster. He had been the one fighting the monsters. She ran forward, past Jack, and threw her small arms around Havoc's neck, burying her face in his coarse fur. You're a good boy, Havoc, she sobbed. You're our good boy. Havoc, the hardened war dog, the survivor of firefights and explosions, stood perfectly still for a moment. Then he did something he had never done before. He turned his massive head and gave Lily's cheek a gentle, slurping lick. Sarah came and wrapped her arms around both Jack and Lily, pulling them into a tight family hug, with Havoc at the center of it all. The family, which had been fractured by unspoken grief and trauma, was suddenly, fiercely whole. They had been tested by violence and had not broken. They had been protected by the two veterans in their midst, the father who was a SEAL and the dog nobody had wanted. The family was liberated, not just from the immediate threat, but from the lingering ghosts of the past. In that moment of shared survival and love, Jack felt the icy grip of his own trauma finally begin to melt. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a husband and a father. And he was a protector. He had found his mission, right here in his own home. The story of the home invasion and the heroic dog who stopped it became a local legend overnight. It started with the police officers and paramedics who had been on the scene, who spoke in hushed, awed tones about the former SEAL and his veteran K-9 partner. The local news picked it up, a welcome story of heroism in a world saturated with bad news. Local veteran and his rescue dog thwart violent home invasion, the headline read. The town, which had known Jack Stryker only as the quiet, intimidating man who lived in the nice house on Oakwood Lane, suddenly saw him in a new light. They saw a hero, but the real star of the story was Havoc. The article detailed his journey, a decorated war hero, injured in the blast that killed his handler, honorably discharged, only to fall through the cracks and end up on death row at the county shelter. It told of how Jack had rescued him just hours before he was scheduled to be put down. And then it described, in vivid detail, how that same unwanted dog had, without hesitation, put his life on the line to protect his new family. The whole town cried. They cried tears of pride for the human and canine veterans in their community. They cried tears of shame for a system that could so easily discard such a hero. They cried tears of sheer, emotional relief that the story had ended not in tragedy, but in triumph. The shelter was inundated with calls. Donations poured in. Adoption applications skyrocketed, especially for the older dogs and the pit bulls, the ones who were usually overlooked. People didn't just want a dog, they wanted a Havoc. The Stryker house became a quiet landmark. People would drive by slowly, hoping to catch a glimpse of the hero dog. They would leave gifts on the porch, bags of expensive dog food, sturdy chew toys, a new bed big enough for a small horse. For Jack, the newfound attention was uncomfortable, but he understood its source. It wasn't about him. It was about the story. A story of redemption, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between soldiers. A few weeks after the invasion, Jack was sitting on his back porch, watching Lily and Havoc play in the yard. The crisp autumn air felt clean, fresh. Sarah came out and sat beside him, handing him a cup of coffee. "He's a different dog," she said, watching Havoc gently take a ball from Lily's hand. "He's happy. He has a purpose again," Jack said. "We both do." He wasn't just talking about protecting their home. After the story broke, Jack had been contacted by dozens of people. Veterans struggling with PTSD, families of fallen soldiers, and MWD rescue organizations. They all wanted his help, his voice, his experience. He had found a new mission, one that had been staring him in the face all along. With Sarah's full support and Oracle's technical wizardry, Jack started the Havoc Project. It was a non-profit foundation with a simple, twofold mission: to rescue, retrain, and rehome retired military and police dogs, and to pair them with veterans suffering from the invisible wounds of war. It was a symbiotic healing process. The dogs gave the veterans a new purpose, a battle buddy to watch their six. And the veterans gave the dogs the loving, structured, respectful home they deserved. They saved each other. The epilogue to this chapter of their lives was written 6 months later. It was a warm spring afternoon. The idyllic setting was a sprawling, green property in the countryside that had been donated to the Havoc Project, now their official headquarters and training facility. Jack stood on a hill overlooking the grounds. Below, a dozen veterans were working with a dozen rescued dogs. There was a retired Army Ranger, a man who hadn't been able to sleep through the night in 5 years, now calmly walking with a massive German Shepherd who had served as a patrol dog in Kandahar. There was a former Marine sniper, a young woman who had lost a leg, laughing as she played fetch with a Belgian Malinois who had been deemed too intense for civilian life. It was a sanctuary of second chances. Sarah came and stood beside him, her hand finding his. "Look at what you built," she said, her voice filled with pride. "What we built," he corrected her, squeezing her hand. His eyes were clear, the ghosts of the past finally at peace. The crushing silence of civilian life had been filled with the happy sounds of barking, laughter, and purpose. A familiar, heavy body leaned against his leg. It was Havoc, his fur now sleek and healthy, the scars on his face looking less like damage and more like medals. He was the Foundation's mascot, its soul, a living testament to their mission. Lily was beside him, her hand resting on his back. Jack reached down and stroked the dog's broad head. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. Havoc looked up at him, his amber eyes full of a deep, unwavering love and loyalty. He was no longer the dog nobody wanted. He was the dog who had saved them all. He had saved Jack from his grief, saved his family from a violent attack, and in doing so, had sparked a movement that was now saving dozens more. The final image of peace was this: the warrior, his family, and his loyal K9, standing together on a sun-drenched hill, watching a new generation of soldiers, both two-legged and four-legged, finding their way home. Jack Stryker had finally completed his mission. He had brought his brother home, not just from the war, but from the cold, and in doing so, had found his own peace at last. The war within was over. He had won.